We begin a two-part series on the canons of Dort. In this first video, I will discuss some introductory materials on the canons. The second video deals more specifically with some theological themes and doctrines in the canons. But right now, let's focus on some of the historical developments that led to the writing of the canons of Dort. Some of the questions we are interested in addressing are: what were the concerns of the Reformed pastors and theologians at the Synod of Dort? What theological issues arose in the 16th century that prompted the framing of the main points in the canons of Dort? A good place to start is with a synopsis of the life of Jacob Arminius, a major character in the debates surrounding some key theological themes that would later shape the canons of Dort. Jacob Arminius was born in the Netherlands on October 10, 1560. He studied under a variety of Reformed theologians at the University of Leiden, where he started off as a student in the liberal arts. Scholars have suggested that Theodor Beza was a major influence on Arminius' theology. Initially, Arminius agreed with Beza's teachings, especially on God's sovereignty and the divine decree on salvation, but later he began to challenge Beza's view on predestination. This was a time in the 16th century when some Reformed theologians were already debating the rationale behind God's absolute and unconditional decree to save some people and leave others in perdition. Arminius may have initially agreed with Beza's supralapsarian position that God's decree to save some and condemn others occurred prior to the fall. With time, however, Arminius became more inclined towards infralapsarianism, that is, the view that God's decree to save some and leave the others condemned must be post-fall. This latter view would put some burden of blame on human beings and exonerate God for causing the elect to believe and by inference causing the republic to disbelieve. While this debate lingered, Arminius began to teach at the University of Leiden and built a significant followership. So, for 6 years, he challenged some core Calvinistic teachings, especially on divine sovereignty, predestination, and the logical order of God's decrees. Jacob Arminius died on October 16, 1609. He was just 49 years old. The teachings of Jacob Arminius, however, did not die with him. Some of his students continued to challenge some basic Calvinistic view on unconditional election, the nature of the atonement, and God's means of grace. Those in this Arminian movement would later be called the Remonstrants or the Protesters, because they objected to what most Reformed theologians consider to be the core teachings of the Christian faith. For the purpose of this class, we will define Arminianism as the attempts by some theologians to explain the relationship between God's sovereignty and mankind's free will, especially in relation to salvation. This definition, in my view, will help us identify some key theological issues that were raised by the Remonstrants, issues that would later trigger off a response from the Calvinistic camp. Now, several scholars have summarized the 5 articles or themes in the Arminian Remonstrance, but I quite like the summary provided by Roger Nicole in his definition of Arminianism in Baker's Dictionary of Theology. According to Nicole, the 5 Arminian articles are: 1. God elects or reproves on the basis of foreseen faith or unbelief, in which case election is based on God's foreknowledge or ability to know those who would believe. 2. Christ died for all human beings, although only believers are saved. The implication here is that the grace of salvation is available to all who would accept it by faith. 3. Human beings are so depraved that divine grace is necessary until faith or any good deed. Like the Calvinists, the Remonstrants also agreed that divine grace is needed for all human beings to have faith or to perform any good act. 4. This grace may be resisted. According to the Remonstrants, even though we need grace to come to faith, we can voluntarily reject or resist this grace. This is a sharp departure from the Calvinistic view that divine grace cannot be resisted. 5. Whether all who are truly regenerate will certainly persevere in the faith is a point which needs further investigation. The remonstrants were unwilling to say that the elect would persevere till the end. In their view, it is possible to lose the gift of salvation. While they do not totally reject divine sovereignty, the Arminians assert that human cooperation is necessary in salvation. In response to Arminianism, the Calvinists affirmed the absolute supremacy of God in all things, more specifically in issues relating to human freedom and salvation. So, underlying the key theological themes that can be drawn from the 5 Arminian articles is the extent of divine sovereignty. How much influence does God exert on the human will to cause the elect to believe and be saved, or by inference to cause those who are damned to not believe? The Arminian debates, therefore, revolve around the doctrines of sin, human free will, or the ability to make choices without external coercion or compulsion, and issues relating to Christ's atonement. Some questions that theologians are concerned with include: who did Christ die for? Is it for everyone? Is Christ's shed blood sufficient to save all human beings? At what point did God decree to save some people and leave others in perdition? These were also some of the questions brought to the limelight at the Synod of Dort when Reformed theologians and church leaders responded to the 5 points of articles drawn up by the remonstrants. You will find in your readings for this week Plantinga's assessment of the political and religious influences on the deliberations at the Synod. So I won't go into those issues. What I would like us to do is to point out some of the key issues that were examined by the pastors and theologians who met at Dort. First, they looked at the 5 points raised by the remonstrants and addressed these issues in light of their own biblical interpretation and theological convictions. Second, the theologians rejected all 5 points of articles that the remonstrants held on to. Third, the Synod at Dort proposed their own 5 points of Calvinism, which today is given the popular acronym TULIP. That is, total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and preservation or perseverance of the saints. Now, note that the theologians at Dort had a different order in their response to the 5 points. So, your assignment for this week is to find out the order in which the Calvinists responded to the remonstrants. Note also that even though we have 5 main points of doctrines in the canons, these are grouped into 4 sections. The 3rd and 4th main points are presented under the same section. The first main point of doctrine covers issues relating to divine election and reprobation. The second main point is on the atonement, that is, Christ's death and human redemption through it. The 3rd and 4th points are on the doctrines of sin and the means of conversion. The final section covers the 5th main point, the perseverance of the saints. Sometimes this section is referred to as the preservation of the saints. These words are not synonyms, but they connote the same idea that God protects the elect from falling away from salvation. God causes the elect to endure the tribulations of life. In conclusion, the theologians at Dort used their defense against Arminianism to articulate their own Calvinistic position on the doctrines of election and predestination. Disagreements often present unpleasant relational atmosphere in the church, but also they often present us with opportunities to reflect on what we believe as Christians. Take, for instance, the ongoing debates in our modern society on, say, gay marriage, women in ministry, or abortion. Very good Christians argue on these issues and they disagree on what we should believe or what we should hold on to. But most denominations agree that they must clearly articulate where they stand on these very difficult issues. Reformed Christians can respectfully disagree on issues without appearing disagreeable to Christians in other denominations. I love how Richard Mouw unapologetically describes his love for Calvinism. First and foremost, I'm a human being, but I find being a Christian to be the best way for me to be a human being. And I find being Protestant the best way for me to be a Christian. And I find being Reformed the best way for me to be Protestant. And I find being a Calvinist to be the best way for me to be Reformed. What a lovely way to put it. The diligent Christian must always be ready to give an account of what he or she believes in. The creeds and confessions, in my view, help us to concisely state our beliefs to those who want to know why we are Christ's followers. The writer of 1 Peter underscores this preparedness in his letter to the church. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. As you complete your readings for this week on the canons of doctrine, keep in mind the key concerns of those who oppose Calvinism and reflect on the question: how would you respond to someone who asks you, if salvation is entirely up to God, don't I have to do something to be saved? Or put differently, if salvation is totally dependent on God, what do I have to contribute to my own deliverance? Have a blessed week, and don't forget to respond to the questions in the discussion for this week.